Want a chance to win a Spring Creek Model Train's 25th anniversary car? Sign up for their newsletter before December 15th for your chance to win each week. The Spring Creek Model Train's newsletter includes new product announcements, pre-order information, specials, coupons, and more. With drawings held each week, the sooner you sign up, the more chances you have to win. Head to the bottom of the homepage at springcreekmodeltrains.com and sign up for your chance to win. Fast forward into the future or bring a touch of the past to your layout with Rapido GP20 tank cars from Home Shops. Deliver clean and safe water to areas in critical need, just like the prototype with water-trained tank cars. These models represent a new, innovative solution to help solve water shortages across North America. Also available from Home Shops, Gargle Oil GP20 tank cars. This industry was a cornerstone of Frank Ellison's Delta lines, and these cars feature a classic 1970s look that pays tribute to the legacy of this inspiring freelance layout. Learn more about these cars and see the entire Home Shops catalog at homeshops.net. Join us for the first Around the Layout podcast live this Sunday, October 19th, streaming live on YouTube. Tony Cook, the editor of Model Railroad News, will be joining me for a live version of our monthly What's Happening in Model Railroading show. We'll also be chatting with Ryan Crawford and Matthew Fricks about their new book, Gateway Western, a regional in transition. Plus, we'll be taking your questions and comments live. Don't miss out. Head to aroundthelayout.com/live to connect with us on YouTube. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time once again for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and joining me, of course, is the guy from Sebastian, Florida, Don Irace. Don, good to see you, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Another month podcast.
It's good to see you, and good to see ATLP 2022 making the rounds on your layout.
Yep, it's got here a few days ago, and it's made its rounds, and it's all ready to be sent off to the next layout 2 streets over. I'm going to be dropping it off to him tomorrow, let him take care of what he's going to do, and then we'll make a trip to St. Cloud.
Awesome. So you're going to drive it down the street. You're not going to put it in the mail.
Nope, I'm going to take it right to his house tomorrow.
Well, that's good. It's quite miraculous that it actually made it to your place in just a couple days. So at least we had one success story with the Postal Service and ATLP 2022. And to be yours, it's quite a miracle, to be quite honest.
Yeah, normally it'd be about a couple of months of a lot of tracking problems, but it came right down here, and we got it right out on the layout and started making its rounds, and finished it all up today. And back in the box it went, and then Jeff texts me, goes, "Oh, you should have took a picture of all 3 of them together." So I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So I unboxed it again, put it back on the layout, took all the other 2 out, and put the brothers and sisters next to each other, took a picture, and then packed it back up again. So,
and of course, you're talking about Jeff Hankey, who moved down to Florida recently from Connecticut. He created ATLP 2024 and 2025 out of the decal set. So he did some own creativity and created 2 cars, and they look good. All 3 of them.
Yeah, they do.
It looked good that the graffiti was on, not the 2022 though. That I was pretty happy about that. You can graffiti any car that you create. That's fine. Yeah. I'm okay with 2022 not having graffiti on it at this point, but it survived pretty well. Came back from Australia, New Zealand, got back to me, and then back down to Florida, and then we'll keep it moving around the country. So a lot of fun with that, and glad you were finally able to get that on the Providence and Worcester.
Yeah, the box it's in is getting a little shaky, though. It's been opened and closed so many times. It's like, I don't know how much more it's going to take.
Well, we can find a new box for as long as the car stays in good shape, and it's made some pretty good shape. We're pretty happy with that. But we're here tonight to talk ops, and we're going to be talking to a guy that we know a lot about ops with, because we've both had the great fortune of operating on his BNSF Montana Division layout, and that would be Mark Herrick. Mark, good to see you again.
Good to see you guys. Glad to be on the show.
Hello, Mark. Glad to see you again.
Nice to see you, Don.
Glad to have you back on the show. I was looking at the schedule. Episode 27. We are now recording episode 193. We got to go back to episode 27, January 17th, 2023. We talked about the BNSF Montana Division and its creation, and tonight we get to talk about operating it, which is such a joy for Don and myself and the Tri-State Railroaders that get the, like I said, good fortune of being able to spend time over there and operate. And I don't know what's better, the operations or the treats that were served during those operating sessions. I think we got to call it a tie, right? I think that'd be the right thing to do, Don.
I kind of miss the treats.
I try to take a picture every time and send it to you, Don, so you can see what you're missing. So.
I see it. It's okay. I just go and buy something to match it. That's all.
Well, awesome stuff. But we'll dive into it, and we're going to talk about operating sessions there and the fun that we have at those. But I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. When we talked back in 2023, I know you had told us that this layout that you had built really didn't have operations in mind. Let's talk about the early versions of it, just kind of recap that a little bit, and then we can talk about how that's evolved to where we are now. So tell us a little bit about the beginnings, Mark.
Okay, so the beginnings, I originally intended to be one or two people operation. It was going to be a tower type of operation, so walk around and all that type of control really wasn't in my mind at that point. It was all single level at that point. I just really hadn't operated anywhere to understand operations that well. Just thinking about it with, myself up there, maybe one friend up there, when we would operate the layout from that tower position and not really enjoy that true feeling of, working with your train and following your train around the layout. So when I made that transition, decided to get into more prototypical operations, it really changed everything for me.
We'll talk about what sparked that. What got you interested into that type of operations?
So what really sparked it, a couple of things happened to me. I was a member of the Silk City Model Railroad Club, and we did a little bit of operations up there before they moved the layout into the new building up there. So that was sort of my first look at operations, and I started to understand a little better of, how to operate the layout. A second part of it was an article in RMC magazine about the Virginia and Ohio Railroad, Alan McClellan's Virginia and Ohio, and how he referred to that, working with your train, following your train, the beyond the basement concepts, and all those different things that he had in that series in RMC. And then the third part of the equation was meeting Don down at a convention down in Stamford, Connecticut, where I'm a member of the NMRA, and there was a regional convention in Stamford. I met Don, got an invitation to go to his layout, go to his operating session, and that sort of solidified that whole direction of operations and what I was trying to accomplish, what I realized finally, what I was trying to accomplish in Windham.
Yeah, I was glad that you asked, and I was more than gracious to have you come by and operate with us. Just so you can see exactly what it's all about. It's when I started with my layout too, it was just me and my father, one level, and it just morphed from there. And this is what happens when we start doing stuff like this, and then as you meet people and you will get to learn more about what's going on, it just grows from there, and you get more and more people, and this is what we end up doing.
Yeah, I think in every place you operate, you take a little bit of, a little learning from everywhere you go. Everybody's slightly different. Every layout's slightly different. And, as you learn those different facets of operation and the way people control the layouts and different things, you take all those little bits of information and you sort of filter them out, what's going to work for you and what can make your operation better. And I've definitely learned a lot, and I continue to learn. I mean, I go to a lot of different places throughout the country, and there's always something you can pick up that can broaden your horizon, so to speak.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do that all the time. I mean, for all the op sessions that we've been to, I mean, you pick up something almost at every one. It's amazing. All the years that we've been operating, but yet you can still go to somebody else's layout and still pick up more information.
So talk about the early impressions that you had with Don's layout in Scituate, Rhode Island. When you first saw that, what came to mind?
Well, I think the first thing that came to mind was like, wow. I walked in that door and I saw that layout, 2 decks and, the amount of people he had there operating and the whole operating scheme he had, just the design of the layout. It was just, at first, it was overwhelming, really, to get a grasp of everything. And then, but as I started to attend, weekly, at that time, he was doing weekly sessions. And so every time I would go and run a different job and learn more different operating trains and stuff like that. And it really changed, my whole philosophy on operations and really what I wanted to do. It pushed me in a completely different direction. And then as I've just expanded from there with the NMRA and going to operating weekends and the conventions and things like that, just all those different places you go to and you just pick up so many different things. And but Don's layout was sort of the foundation for me to really push me in that direction to come back and unfortunately come back and change my layout. And not unfortunately, I shouldn't say it that way, but it definitely made me tear down a single deck layout and build a 2 deck layout in Wyndham, so it was something I wasn't anticipating, but I saw the potentials there with a 2 deck layout and the operating abilities of a 2 deck layout. And I didn't, I had no turning back. So
How long between seeing Don's layout in his double deck and the success he was having with his and the operations that were going on there to coming back? Was it that same night, or was it a little bit of a process, or how did that all go? I mean, were you ready to tear this thing down immediately?
Well, I came back and I definitely I saw my shortfalls. I knew right away that this was not going to satisfy me anymore. It just wasn't going to, meet the standard that I started to see, in my own mind. So it was a little while. I think I actually invited Don over to take a look at what I had started, and he came over and gave me a lot of good pointers of what we could do, with the layout, and different operating ideas, and it definitely pushed me in that direction to basically dismantle what I had and then build up a 2 deck layout. It wasn't immediate, but I would say like within a year or so of meeting him and getting him over there and everything, that's when I started to change things out.
When I finally got over to his house and everything, I mean, I think the biggest part, it was trying to find, because he wanted a 2 deck layout. So the biggest part was trying to find a place in the room we already had to put a helix. I think that was the biggest thing they need to find out first if we can even start doing this double deck thing. And but we walked around and we looked around and then like where it is now, it's like that's like the perfect place for it. Was over there. And then once he got that in, forget it. The sawdust was flying after that.
Well, talk about where you positioned that helix.
The room is small. I mean, realistically, it's 20 by 24. So the design of the layout was really prohibitive of where I could put the helix. So we ended up finding some open space. As you come up the stairs, the layout is on the second floor of a barn. And as you come up the stairs to that second floor, there was some open space under the roof on the left there. So we built the helix in that open space and then basically ran the lines through the wall. I have 2 doors that you can close because the barn outside of the room is not heated or climate controlled at all. So you can slide those 2 doors open. The trains basically come through the wall back into the main room and make the circuit around the layout to go back into the helix and climb or go down, whichever way they're doing it. It really freed up space in the room to not have to have that helix. If I had to have the helix, I would have lost some pretty valuable layout space. So it worked out really well.
How much would you say that changed from the beginning to what we have now? Would you say maybe in a percentage? Is it 50% different? Is it 70% different? How vastly different is it from where you started to where it is now?
Oh, it's probably 75% change. The first level is pretty similar to what I had with some adjustment. So some of the problems I had at the beginning were deep bench work. I had really deep bench work, and that really didn't work, for operations, because you have to really be able to reach from the front of the layout to the back of the layout for or any type of switching areas or whatever. So that was a pretty major change from the original layout. And then keeping the benchwork narrow enough to be able to put that second deck over it. Because my barn, the gables of the roof come in on the side. So the second level on the outside edges of the room are basically under the roof, under the gable part of the roof, the rafters. So it definitely comes in a little bit from the full size of the room. So keeping that top benchwork really narrow basically controlled the width of the bottom level too. So there was a major change.
Yeah, but one for the good though. You know, it was definitely worth it. His aisle spaces were a little bit tight, but you kind of shave back a little bit in certain spots to kind of widen them up a little bit. But it works.
Yeah, it's definitely not a really spacious layout as far as aisle space. You know, I'm really limited to like 6 operators, and even the 6 operators have to coordinate with each other, have to work together a little bit to get around. If you're running a mainline train, you have to work with the guys that are switching a little bit to get past people or whatever. It's not as tight as some layouts I've been to, you know, but it could definitely be improved as far as the width. But everything has a cost, you know. Everything you do is, if you really try to widen out the aisles, you're definitely eliminating significant switching areas or mainline areas or whatever. So, you know, it's really going to change the layout pretty significantly. So it's really hard at this point in time for me to, I don't know, in my own mind, to make those changes, I guess. But it's it works, but I can't say that with more than 6 people, you'd really be jammed up, you know. So that's why I limit it to 6.
I like to think of us Tri-State Railroaders as a pretty tight group. When we get to Marks, we're just a little bit tighter.
Very friendly.
Yeah. And then, I didn't want to use the word intimate, but it can be a little tight for some spots. But and then on top of that, we've got your wife, Susan, who's serving us all these goodies. And I'm like, maybe she should be bringing up like carrots and celery and some healthier stuff to try to build some more aisle space. But no, I think that, honestly, and Don, you can probably speak to this as well. You always talk about and give advice about aisle space, but in the case of Mark's layout, we certainly don't want to see any of the layout reduced to gain. We'll put up with it for sure.
What I was going to say is that because of the railroad he's modeling, the BNSF, that's a layout with big, wide, sweeping curves, and and if you try to shrink the layout to make an aisle, you're going to lose that whole effect of what the BNSF main line's all about. You can't have these short little curves trying to pull these big long trains around. It just wouldn't look right. So I would myself, it was me, I would just do exactly what I did. In lieu of losing the shape of the railroad, I would just deal with the narrow aisle spaces. It works. It does work.
And find smaller operators. I mean, I think that may be the other thing you have to do, right? But of course that eliminates me. But nonetheless, no. But let's talk about, as you're mentioning the BNSF Montana Division and these sweeping curves and the prototype. Let's talk about how you incorporated what you knew. I mean, we learned back in 2023 your love for the BN came from a trip out to Montana. But talk about incorporating operations onto this new platform that you built and taking what they do out on the Northern Transcon and being able to bring that to your layout. What were some of the elements there?
Well, definitely some of the elements were those long mainline runs, like Don referred to, the sweeping curves. Everything's super elevated to give you that, the feel of, broad curves, long trains, being able to go through the scenery. I really tried to keep that a big part of it. I love switching myself, but I do love seeing a train going through scenery. That's single track, double track, whatever, and making those long runs like that. So that was a really big priority for me, to be able to have those halfway decent runs. The runs where the front of your train isn't in one town and the back of your train, is 2 towns over still. You know what I mean? So you can come out of one town and you're into the next town. The train's, completely separated from those 2 towns. And I also tried to do it where the town separations they were away from each other. So as you faced one town, the other town was behind you. So you weren't looking into like a scene where you had town after town after town, like right in front of your face. At least there was that separation. That was a big part of it. And then the other part of it was definitely those switching areas. Unfortunately, the prototype where I model between the funnel and then the Northern Transcon, there's very little switching anymore up there. A lot of the areas have closed. So it changed. There was quite a bit of modeler's license, so to speak, proto freelancing, if you want to call it that, where I had to research what was there back in the Great Northern days and try to come up with some areas for, some switching areas and things like that to try to bring that into it. Because like I did say, I do love switching, and that's a big part of my favorite thing. So I guess from my operator standpoint, I was always looking for, you get guys that come in and they just want to run through trains, and you get guys that come in and they just want to switch. So I tried to, I think we all design the layouts for ourselves, but I think a big part of layout design is for the people that are going to operate it too. You want to keep your operators, reasonably happy and wanting to come back. If it's not an area that they enjoy being in or running, they don't come back, and then that makes a pretty lonely operating session. So I think that was a big part of it.
That's a great point. Because when you deal with operators, the more you have, the more of that you have. Some guys like to switch, some guys just like to run big long trains, and you got to be able to make everybody happy. My layout was the same way. I had enough switching, and we had enough through trains with a little bit of switching. We had trains just went right through. So it's nice to try to keep a little smorgasbord of everything to attract all these people. You know what I mean? You were dealing with 6 people. I was dealing with 15 people. But it doesn't matter how many people there are. You're still going to end up with a mixed bag of people that want to do different things. And that's a really good point to make.
And as far as the BNSF goes, I mean, the BNSF, if anybody's been up in that area and ever rail fan that area, I mean, it's heavy mainline action. There's tons of, TOFC stuff, containers on flat cars, the usual trains like that, grain trains. You got, all kinds of crude oil trains and ethanol. There's all kinds of things moving, and a lot of unit trains and stuff. There's some coal. The coal's starting to come back a little bit, actually. So it's a good mixed bag of those through freights, too. It's not the same thing all the time. You throw Amtrak in the middle of it. That's something unique. So I just think there's a decent mix of trains for mainline action. And then for the switching, it's just sort of the same way. You got some switch jobs that are real easy. So you get a new guy or a guy that can't stay the whole night. He can just come for an hour or so. You can give him a job that's, fairly quick, pretty simple. And then there's other jobs that will take you the whole night, you'll be there and, working that particular job for almost the whole session. So I think it's nice to have that balance where you can, have a little bit for everybody. And I enjoy running them all, really. I mean, that's one thing, I've heard it on your show here quite a bit, was as an operator and as a layout owner, I really believe, you have to run every job that you have on your layout. You have to get the feel of it. You have to see if it works. You have to see where it can be improved. Because if you don't run it, you really can't expect other people to give you all the inside information on what's wrong with it. A lot of times guys try to sugarcoat things and they don't want to upset you, so they don't really tell you the truth sometimes. But you really have to get the feel of the jobs yourself and make the changes, so the guys are happy. You want to try to keep people as reasonably happy as you can. I mean, some people are never happy, but
I don't know anybody's ever operated on your layout who was never happy. I push this every time we talk about this. The host needs to know his railroad inside and out. What the jobs do, if it's going to work, if there's problems, anything, there's always something. I mean, I've done it and I'm still doing it. So, I mean, now on mine, I've been trying some longer engines in the spots where I've been using shorter engines to see if those longer engines work, so I can kind of switch the power up a little bit. I got plenty of power hanging around in boxes, not doing it. So it's always fun to do stuff like that yourself, just to kind of get involved in your own layout and making sure everything's perfect for the guys when they come the next time.
Absolutely.
So tell me about the process of you running your own jobs and you getting out of it, which you feel a need to get out of it.
Some of them I found that they just didn't work right. I thought they would work, and then you get in there and you realize that this is not set up right. You don't have the switches in the right location. You don't have things set up the right way. So prior to scenery, of course, building a layout, that's when you want to do this stuff. You really want to have that, that breakout session where you can just go in and get people over there, run the thing, run it for, weeks and get a lot of feedback and get honest feedback from the operators and see what doesn't work. And that's what I found. I found a few areas that really weren't working. I found some areas that worked really well. Minor ways I could improve it. Some siding lengths changed a little bit, a few more, lengths for different cars. Because that's an important thing too. If you go in and you're expecting to switch out 6 or 8 cars, but the siding will only hold 3 cars, I mean, you're out on the main line, and that's not realistic for the prototype. They really try to get the trains off the main line into the siding. So, adjusting siding lengths or whatever, or adjusting train lengths in the operation. It may come down to that. Maybe you can't run that 8-car train or 10-car train up to that location because you just don't have the siding length to work that train properly. So I think that's by me running those jobs, I found a lot of that, and I found just areas where I can make it a lot better than what I originally anticipated how it worked. And I mean, it's definitely, there's always room for improvement, though. I mean, it's definitely not there even. I mean, I know there's places I can make more improvement. And I think as a layout owner, you really never, everybody talks about your layout was never done. Well, if you're an operating layout, it's still never really done. You always find little things you can always go back and change and tweak to make it even better.
Yeah. Is there any one particular job on your layout that you feel as though still needs work?
There's an area of Trentwood is one area that's a tough area, and that one there is a lot of trailing point and there's a lot of facing point work there. I have a switcher that's assigned to that area to help with that particular area. I just put new switches into there. I cut some new turnouts in that area to try to help get the engine to be able to run around the train a little easier. But that one there is a definite a switching puzzle that I've always tried to avoid because switching puzzles are not really realistic. The railroads try to make it as easy as they can for their crews, I mean, to the point of, sending out these trains that go out and switch all trailing points and then they make a turn if they're, and then they come back and they switch all trailing points coming back. They don't even switch everything, at each town. They come back into that same town going in the other direction.
Right.
There's definitely a few areas, but then there's some areas that I'm really happy. I have a Columbia Falls job that I really enjoy. The Sandpoint ethanol thing, that's a fairly new switching job, but that one there seems to be, I enjoy that one. I've talked to some guys that have run that one. They like that one. So there's definitely some areas that are really worked out well, better than I thought they would.
Well, I saw Don's ears perk up for sure when you mentioned Columbia Falls, and we'll dive into those jobs in particular here in a few moments. But I want to go back to the list of these jobs, and you've got a lot going on. You've got so many jobs. I don't even think we get to run all of your jobs when we're operating your layout. But you have all this, again, you mentioned through trains, you got local switching jobs, you've got interchange jobs. Talk about developing what Don and I in the past have called the dance. Right? This operations dance of coordinating all of this together. Talk about how you started to put those dance steps together on your layout as you developed your operating scheme.
Yeah. So most of my switch jobs come out of Spokane, Yardley Yard. And so the dance there is you have to get certain trains out on the main line. You got to get them moving in their general direction, because if you don't get them moving before other trains come out, it really fouls the whole layout up. So what happens is you need to get certain trains out in an order just to be able to keep the main clear. If you bring out a switch job that switches 2 towns out from Spokane, and then there's 3 or 4 locals going past that point, you have to be able to get those trains past that point before the next guy starts the work. So, and that's prototypical. That's how they really do it on the prototype, where they really try to get those trains that are further out on the road, and then they bring in the trains that are closer to the yard. They bring those out last, just for that fact of freeing up the dispatcher to not pull all his hair out, because it really gets bound up. I mean, and I have a lot of decent passing tracks, a lot of domain to get trains around each other, but it doesn't take much to really, if you throw some through trains in there, it can really get jammed up. So I guess that would be the dance that you referred to. It's just figuring that out and how all that comes together, and you learn that in those shakedown sessions. Those you get the guys there, and you just start running these trains and what you envision these trains are going to do, and you just keep a pad of paper there, and you say, yeah, guess what? That didn't work. I can't let that out. That's got to get out first. This one should really follow it. And then you start to understand that sequence of how it really should work, and you can sort of apply it and get everything working in sync.
So being a dispatcher on your layout, for the first couple of times I dispatched, I didn't know it was dance thing yet. We were still working all that out. And I always seemed to let trains out before Columbia Falls went out. So as a dispatcher, Columbia Falls has to be the first train out of Spokane Yard. Has to be, because he's going the farthest away. Anything,
yep.
then anything could come in behind the back of that, and it works out fine. But by far, Columbia Falls needs to get out of that yard first, by all means. First.
Yeah. Definitely.
So there's it's other like Ray was saying, you've got like a ton of switching jobs. I mean, you basically can do this job this month, and then next week do this job, and this job the following month. And to avoid people working on top of each other. You know what I mean? So that's like another kind of a dance that we talk about all the time. I've done it on my layout. I've done it on my old layout. It's just something that it takes time to nurture to get all that done. And you've done a pretty good job of working that all out and everything.
How much time did that take you to get that sorted out? I mean, how many shakedown sessions were you facing before you finally started to feel good about the way the railroad operated?
It takes a while. I would say you're into the, dozen times, 15 times. It takes a while to get it all figured out. And I mean, you make little gains. I think each session you do one little tweak. I think the biggest thing is you don't want to go in and shake the whole thing up again. You know what I mean? You've got to do it in little tweaks of the operating scheme, and then see what happens. And then you see that, well, that did work, then you keep that there, and you maybe tweak something else. And it's a little bit each session. And, with me running once a month, that stretches out quite a ways. I mean, you're out a year of just running and seeing what happens. And, like I said, I think even today, you find little tweaks and stuff that you can make to make it better, and figure it out. And having a dispatch layout, definitely adds another dimension to that, because now the dispatcher, it's easy to send a train out and say, you've got clearance from this point to this point, and just let them go. But when a dispatcher's involved, you've got that person trying to control it the way they see it, and that can be a little bit different than the way you see it as an owner, because a dispatcher, I give the dispatchers pretty much free rein. They can run the session the way they think they want to run it. If they want to let, the Whitefish job out before Columbia Falls and it screws them up, well, guess what? It's on them. They did it to themselves. They boxed themselves in that corner, But I try to definitely give pointers, but I'm not a layout owner that, tells everybody how to do everything. I don't like that myself when I go to layouts. I like to just be told, this is what we're trying to accomplish here. You figure it out, type of thing. Have a guy standing over your shoulder and telling you how to do every step. I don't find that enjoyable at all. I would rather, make my mistakes and say, hey, can I do that job next time I come? I know I can do better, and I look at it the same way with the dispatcher, Well,
I think what you've also found is the pure enjoyment of watching Don sweat as a dispatcher too. So, and watching all this, but that's where I wonder, as you're trying to perfect and make it a more efficient, when does chaos actually become the fun part? and where that mix up actually starts to become the enjoyable part of it too, because it's, hey, it's emulating real world, and the real world isn't perfect either.
Oh, absolutely. And, there'll be times where, I'll be watching the session a little bit. Most sessions, just to say from from an owner's standpoint, an operator standpoint, I typically don't really get too involved in my operating sessions. I sort of try to keep myself semi-free, whether it's helping with dispatch or we've tried even the dual dispatchers where one guy takes the lower level and the other guy takes the upper level. We've played around with that. But I try to sort of keep myself free, or I'll do a real simple switching job that I could just cut out of, I'm not on the main. I could just get away from it and go help something, fix something or whatever. I'll watch it a little bit and I'll see that Don's like really laid back and he's got nothing going on. And I'll say to, somebody, hey, you want to run through train and come out of, you're going to come out of Shelby and, run a through train out of Shelby, and just to throw a curve into it. And then, something else will come up and I'll say, hey, get another through train coming out of Spokane, out of Yardley, and start running that up. And just to throw some curves into the system, so to speak, to get Don, a little bit, definitely keeping him on his toes. There's been sessions where he's been slammed, and then there's been others ones where he's really easy. But I know the ones where he's been slammed at the end of the session, he'll say to me, yeah, I was busy tonight. There was a lot of activity. We ran a lot of trains tonight, so I think it's enjoyable, I think, for everybody.
Don, what is the more challenging part of dispatching Mark's layout?
It depends. Depends on what job he's running that night, because he doesn't run all his jobs. So if sometimes there's like a lot of trains in one place, like if Sandpoint's running, then you got stuff going in and out of Whitefish, and the Columbia Falls of Mag, it's on a whole nother level. But it's just Sandpoint ties up one of the mains, basically. So you basically, once he's in there, you're down to one track over there. So now you got to coordinate. Now, if you got Amtrak running, there's a station stop there at Sandpoint. You got to get him in there. So it's a lot. A lot of it's on the operator of the train to try to keep himself in a position where I can get him out of the way to try to do what I got to do over there. But when there's nothing going on at Sandpoint, then they can pretty much have free run over there. But if you got guys that are running through trains coming back and forth, again, you got to have a track open to keep these trains moving. Like he said, when we're doing dual dispatching, it's easier with two dispatches because you just got to concentrate on your end, and then the other guy's concentrate on his end. But the nice part about it is the guy on the bottom doesn't really pay attention what's going up on top. So all of a sudden he's calling you, so I got a train that's got to come down on your territory. So now you're gonna I got to make room for him. So it's nice. And to be honest with you, when it's busy, I'd rather have it that way. It's much more fun for me when things are just going everywhere, when there's trains all over the place. So for me, that I'd rather have a busy night than a lax night any day, even if I'm dispatching by myself.
Mark, is this music to your ears? Is this what you envisioned when you were starting to put all this operating scheme together, like hearing the result of this and hearing it from a dispatcher that you've got a great, enjoyable challenge on your layout?
Yeah, that's definitely, that was definitely one of the things I was shooting for, especially after, being at Don's and when he was in Rhode Island, and dispatching on that layout, you know what I mean? It just really, it all came together, and it's really, makes me happy that guys, enjoy that part of it, because that's what I wanted to have. And like I said before, the prototype, the BNSF on the Transcon, that whole, not the Transcon, but the High Line and that whole area. It's a busy railroad. There was a lot of trains, in that area. So I try to emulate that on my layout as best I can with the space I have. And so when Don has a busy night and he gets done and he said, yeah, I was really busy tonight. You really threw a lot at me, but I am the same way. When I dispatched, the layout or his layout or whatever in Rhode Island, it was the same way. When we had a busy night, it was more enjoyable, rather than just sitting back, and twiddling your thumbs and, reading a magazine for a few minutes or talking to somebody, doing a true dispatcher's job, really getting into it. And that's what I wanted. And I feel like I've accomplished, a lot of the things that I've wanted.
Yeah, you've definitely accomplished that. That's for sure.
So let's dive into the jobs. I know Don's chomping at the bit to talk about his favorite Columbia Falls, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. But let's start there. Mark, talk about putting that area together. Describe it for us a bit, and then we'll get into asking Don why it's so enjoyable.
So Columbia Falls, I tried to emulate what was actually there, not necessarily prototypically, but in Columbia Falls, it was a Plum Creek a lumber company, and Columbia Falls was a pretty substantial customer for the BN and for the BNSF. So I tried to emulate that up there in my town of Columbia Falls, and I wanted something that was a very diverse car type of industry. So, you go into that industry, you have all different types of cars. You have box cars for MDF and plywood. You have gons, carrying wood chips, sawdust and stuff, and getting those out of there. You have tank cars for the chemicals for, making the MDF plywood and the glues and stuff that are involved there. You have log cars, you have bulkheads, you have center beams. There's a really big mix of cars, and every track is basically assigned at that industry of what type of car goes into each track. And so you go into that job and you come in there, and I try not to have my yard guys block the trains. I think, that's prototypical to block them to make it easier on the other end, but I think sometimes it makes it too easy. So I tell the yard guys, don't block the trains. Just get the right cars on each train and let them roll, and they'll figure it out when they get there. They're going to have some work. So they get up to Columbia Falls, and they've got a lot of shoves. It's all basically trailing points, but there's definitely a lot of shoving and pulling cars out and getting everything into the right track and building, and it takes quite a while. But that particular job, you're talking an 18, 20 car train of activity up there to get that job done. So I just like the diversity of the cars too. That's what I think is neat. Some industries you go into and you're just doing covered hoppers or whatever, but that particular industry, you're doing all kinds of different types of cars. And I think that just makes it more fun.
Okay, Don, what makes it so good?
Why
is it that you're pushing everybody out of the way when you come up from Florida to get to that job? Tell us about it.
That job is the best job on the layout. It is by far the best job. It's a switch. If you like switching, that's the job right there. As far as he mentions blocking the train, that train is blocked as far as I'm concerned. Come right out of God, because anything that's going to Columbia Falls is on that train. That's a block for me. So it doesn't matter. So the challenge at Columbia Falls is trying to switch that whole job and keep your cars off the two main lines. That's the challenge. And to me, that's like the best part of that job. And it can be done because I do it every time. But there's some guys that go up there, they tie up main two the whole night. So now the dispatcher's only got one main line that he can use. It can be done the way it works out. So what I do is when I go in there, I sort the cars. So basically, it's a back part of Columbia Falls, and there's a front part of Columbia Falls. I get all the stuff that goes in the back, the plum plywood and the chemicals and the glues and the box cars and flat cars. I get them all lined up. So I can just get the engine and shove those cars right in, and all the stuff in the front I take out and I place on the tracks in the front to get them out of the way. And then I just start shoving back there and switching all the different industries he's got back there. So basically I'm working my way forward. And the last thing I switch out is the wood chips. So now what I've ended up doing is I ended up having a place to store all my outbounds instead of putting them out on the main line. So I'm actually switching the train and then building the train, and then I come in the front, and then I do all the switching in the front, and then I shove all the outbounds on that same track. It's just nice and long to do all that on. So when the job is finished, you really just grab your train, you pull everything out on the main, you shove it down on main two, you cut your engines off, you run around on main one to the other end, and then you go home and you're done. But the challenge is to switch that whole area with that 17 to 18 cars in there and not have to be out on the main line. You might have to pull out on the main line a couple of times, but most of the time it's possible not to go out there at all. But like I said, for a guy who likes to switch, that's the job on Mark's layout right there, by far.
Is that your favorite too, Mark, of the jobs that are on your layout?
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite. I really enjoy that. You know, and it's funny because it's basically one industry, but when you have those different car types and different spots, you know, on all those different tracks and stuff, it's almost like there's like 7 or 8 different industries there, you know, really, because there's, you know, 7 or 8 different types of cars that have to go on each of these tracks. So even though it's related to basically one industry, it makes, you know, it's like you're switching like, you know, 6 or 8 different locations actually. But yeah, and I agree with Don. You know, the philosophy is to try to keep it in, you know, in the yard, you know, up there at Columbia Falls. Don't be out on the main. Don't be on that secondary main up there. I get some guys and they come up and immediately take the secondary main. And I'm not going to say anything, whatever. If it makes it harder for the dispatcher, but whatever, you can do it. You know, that there's 2 mains there. But if you do, like Don said, and you try to keep everything in that Columbia Falls industrial area, you can, you know, it makes it harder, but it makes it more enjoyable. Yep.
I heard that if you keep your train off of Main 2, you get an extra treat at the end of the night. That's the prize to win. But I think, Don, we talked quite a bit about this concept, and especially what I've talked about when I was building my layout, that I learned you don't need a whole bunch of industries when you're able to do this. And it seems like Columbia Falls is case in point, that you don't need 50 industries when you can have one industry that you can do so many different things at.
Right. I mean, like I always say, every layout owner, every layout needs that one good size industry to keep somebody busy at. And Columbia Falls, I mean, Mark's got a few good size industries on his layout, but Columbia Falls is, to me, the best and the most challenging. I mean, I look at the challenge part of it. That's how I am. Anytime I can grab a job there's some kind of a challenge at, I'm right there. I that's just what I like to do. But all those jobs are good. I don't know if I ran every job on your layout.
No, I don't think you have.
I don't think I haven't done Sam Point yet because I'm not up there often enough to do all these jobs because I just seem to morph right into Columbia Falls every time I come up, you know. But
and then it seems pretty recent, but I mean, it's been a little while, but you create a new industry with the ethanol facility that you added, Mark. Talk about adding industry even after the fact. Now, you've got all these other industries, and yet here's another one. Talk about that. Yeah,
well, I always had intentions of the ethanol plant in Sandpoint, which is, like I said, completely proto-freelanced. You know, nothing like that existed there. It's another decent sized industry, basically 4 different product types, you know, bringing in corn or whatever in the grain cars and the covered hoppers, the ethanol cars coming in, being filled with ethanol, the gasoline car for denaturing the alcohol so people don't drink the trains if they're leaking. You know, those things. And then the dry distillers grains going out. So you got basically 4 different car types, different tracks. It can be sort of the same kind of industry where you can do that off the main. It's definitely very challenging, but it is long enough to be able to do that. It takes some, you know, back and forth motions between the tracks. But that's another fun job, and it's something that I have always wanted to put there. You know, it was basically designed for that. It was just a matter of getting the tracks laid in there and sort of figuring it out what I was going to do there. And it makes it a little challenging there because you're coming up onto Lake Pend Oreille, the bridge there, and I try to limit the length of how far out you can go. You can go out onto the bridge, but you can't go past the end of the bridge and start getting into the limits of Hauser on the other end. So, you know, I throw a few of those things in there to try to make it a little more difficult. But I don't want to make it to the point where it's so difficult that people, you know, don't enjoy themselves either, you know, where they make it so hard that it's not fun, you know. I think there's a fine line. You have to play that fine line. like I said before, I do have some switch jobs that are real easy. If a guy is learning switching or whatever, you can go into Hauser. It's, basically 2 locations to switch, pretty simple. It's still fun. You bring in the interchange from the Spokane International comes up in there after you're done with the job, and they do a little interchange swap with the cars you had brought in there. So it's like a two phase of that job, 2 phases of that job. So, I guess it all evolves as you're going along. Everything keeps evolving, and you come up with some new ideas and some neat things to do. And I guess, like I said before, you're really never done. You always find little tweaks that you can make.
Well, if anything, I learned tonight's podcast is that I've probably been breaking some rules switching that ethanol job. But it's a lot of fun, and it's a great addition for sure.
So again, like I said, it was Sandpoint. It's like a dispatch is, I don't know, you call it a nightmare, you call it a dream. I mean, it depends on what's going on there, because that train does pull out onto the main line a lot, and you got to remember that he's going to be pulling out there. You never know when it's going to happen, and he's going to call, he's going to want to go out there. And sometimes he's going to wait, because you got a train either going north or south or east or west. And you got to let trains go through. You got priority trains. You got Amtrak's got to stop there. So that's a challenging area for a dispatcher too, to keep control of over there. It's a big area, Sandpoint. There's a lot going on in there. There's plenty of tracks in there, but there's also a lot of cars that go in there too. So
it's a big train.
Yeah.
It's a big train. You've got single track. So what happens there is you've got double track on each side of it, but you got the single track that goes over the lake, like Ponderay, and that single track really funnels you down, and that's a dispatch. Any single track is a dispatching nightmare. Anytime you go to any single track, that's a choke point for the dispatcher somewhere that he's got to really be careful of what he's jamming into those areas, because he has no way around it.
A lot of nights, the dispatcher thinks that maybe we can store some of those cars on the MRL track. But the trouble is, if we try to spot cars on the MRL track, it's going to go woo.
Yeah.
Because if it was a break there or something to hold the cars back, then that'd be because the MRL only comes out of there and it goes back in there. So it's a good place to park some cars on to keep things clean. But there's just no way to hold them there.
Well, I've thrown some thumbtacks, and I found the hill brake that from Macrail works pretty well over there.
That thing works well.
Yeah.
I got one.
I
can't show it. It's not show and tell.
There you go.
Yeah. No, that's in one area that I want to try to do something more permanent for some type of thing to hold the train on the MRL, where you could put the train on the MRL, and then something that would either come up through the ties, maybe a tortoise, with some type of, flip switch, and the tortoise will drive the rod up through the ties and then, through the ballast, and then hold the train and then flip it and it'll go away. But I really haven't finalized what I'm going to do there for more permanent, hill holding, because that you definitely have an incline going down into Laurel Yard on the MRL right there. So
you should try that. Do you have one of those Macrail?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Ray's used that.
Yeah, you should try. I tell you, that thing works great. I have where my sugar plant is. I got a little bit of a grate over there. That thing works. That's like perfect.
Yeah, Ray used it, I think, a few times.
For more on that, check out macrailproducts.com. There you go, Greg.
There we go, Greg.
You certainly haven't been afraid to make changes. Do you envision any additional changes to your operating scheme as you move forward, Mark?
Yeah, I think there'll be a few minor changes. There's still a little bit of industry I got to finalize. Like over in Trentwood, there's the aluminum plant, Kaiser Aluminum, on the backdrop. That's really never been finalized. It's just one siding going in there, and that was supposed to be a couple of sidings. So there's always a few little things. The top really is not going to change. The top level, the second level, the scenery is basically all done up there. I don't really see much changing up there, at least right now. That would be a major change, and I don't really foresee that. But the bottom is still, roughed in scenery. So I do have that potential to still do some little tweaks of, the track work or whatever to make things maybe a little bit better. over in Libby, there's a couple of tracks going into a Coors plant basically, and I'm thinking about possibly making that second track that's in there maybe some type of corn syrup car clean out type of thing, because they did have something, I guess, at one point somewhere on the BNSF where they had some corn syrup stuff going on at some kind of plant. So I don't know. I mean, there's just stuff in the back of my mind, but whether it'll come to fruition or not is another thing, I guess.
I can tell you one thing I really admire about your operating scheme, and of course the layout supports it, is the ability to do flexible operations as well, where you can throw in an extra. Like we had fun. We got those Roca tank cars, the fire tanks, and you sent me on an extra to deliver that, or you can throw in a high and wide extra, or you have that flexibility. It's not just so tight that everything has to happen and there's no room for that growth or expansion or that little bit of fun play aspect. It really works well. And talk about how you take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fun thing to do. It just keeps it fresh. You know what I mean? It keeps the operating scheme, and the operating sessions a little bit interesting, because guys, I think, you get really, you almost, it gets like clockwork, you know what you're going to do. And so run the same way, every week or every month or whatever your operating scheme is. But when you can have that ability to throw like some kind of special in there, whether it's an inspection train, like, I have ideas. At some point, I'm going to move some snow equipment, up in Essex. I'm going to move some of the snow equipment around, intending like, they're getting ready for winter and they're going to move that around. I did helpers for a while. I had manned helpers on the hill pushing from up through Glacier, up to Essex. We did those for quite a while. I think I'm going to bring the helpers back in. I like to get those going again and use the helpers a little bit more on the top level. It's just little things like that, I think, to just keep it interesting, keep it fresh, keep it new. So guys, they don't get so, lackadaisical, and, it's always the same thing, just like the jobs, I really try to encourage guys to take different jobs, don't always do the same one. The exception of Don always wanting Columbia Falls, but, it's, I'd like to see everybody, just try other things, just get a feel for the rest of the layout. A couple of jobs that frequently don't get run on my layout are the East Glacier job and the Shelby job. A lot of times those don't get operated. And those are two fun jobs. You're right in the scenery. Everything's done up there. But a lot of times those have a tendency not to get run. And I'm really trying to push to get those run more often and get guys to do those, because it's another fun area to do some switching and things like that. But that fire train was, when I got those cars, it was, it was a ball to be able to just run that, put it on a siding up there, and have it sitting there, and make somebody have to run that up there. So I like to keep, like you said, keep things fluid a little bit, where I'm not so tight on a schedule that I gotta, everything's got to be run by the numbers, so to speak.
The fire's been going on for a long time up there.
Yeah, well, it's a big one, probably got a couple 100,000 acres or something.
The dispatchers getting upset because the whole main tied up over there because of a fire train.
Yeah, they're mopping it up. It's taking a little bit more time.
The dispatcher's trying to get that track back because he needs it to get traffic, and we certainly need to get back and operating again over there. I know you've had quite a busy summer personally, but hopefully as we head into what I like to call model railroad season, I'm sitting here in the Around the Layout podcast studio in a hoodie, which means that we're definitely in the model railroad season, and hopefully we'll get back to operations over there again soon. And I know, Don, you're chomping at the bit to get that dispatching going as well.
Definitely can't wait to get back into operations and dispatching on your layout again. I hope you have another operation session real soon so we can get on board. You just so everybody knows that you use a card system to control your movements on your.
I do.
Railroad. We didn't touch on any of that. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, that's fine too.
Yeah. So I do use car cards. I use a 4-cycle waybill. In the size of my layout, the number of trains, the multi, all I have 8 locals, I thought about switch lists, and I enjoy switch lists. I do enjoy layouts that have switch lists, but for my layout, and the way the cars have to sequence and how they have to, everything sort of is a tied together. It's sort of a dance, if you want to call it that. It's really hard to use a switch list in my type of setup. At least I'm not sure how to do that, So I think the car cards are the way to are the best way for me to go.
Yeah, you'd have your hands full trying to do a switch list on a layout. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I do mine. Mine's relatively easy, and it takes me like 40 minutes to do all my switch lists. I couldn't even imagine how long it would take you to to whip out a switch list for all those jobs. You know? But anyway, I mean, but it's your layout's fun to operate on. It's very well done. I know everybody enjoys running over there. I can't wait to get back up there again to run Columbia Falls, and I just can't wait to get back operating and dispatching the BNSF again. It's been a while now, so
yeah, it has, and I definitely want to get something probably for November. We're gonna try to get back to the monthly operating sessions. Like Ray said, I had a really busy summer this year, but I'm ready to get back. It is model railroading season. I agree, and I definitely want to get back out there and get the guys back over here and get the wife cooking some desserts again.
Well, we're going to definitely hold you to it because we're chomping at the bit to get back and operate and be a part of the BNSF Montana Division, be back as your crew. The treats and the operating all are going to be great, and can't wait to get back over to it. Mark, thank you so much for joining Don and I as we talk ops this month, and no better than to talk about the BNSF Montana Division, and appreciate you sharing all of that with us.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I enjoy being here.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.